Good afternoon, everybody. Fergus Dolan here from NALA. You're very welcome to our webinar this afternoon on working with ESOL students with broken or no education prior to accessing education in Ireland. We're delighted to have Sara Golding and Damian Rocks from the City of Dublin ETB. Sara and Damian will be facilitating today. They did a workshop last week at the NALA ESOL conference on the same topic. So it's kind of similar stuff to that. So I hope you all enjoy it. By the way, I wanted to stress, please at any stage, if Sara or Damian are showing a slide and talking about anything, type in a question you have or a point or a tip or a resource in the chat box. And I can then read out for everyone's benefit what you have. So please do engage by typing in questions, and at the end we see how time is. If we finish before 2, we'll have time for questions for Damian and Sara, and if not, we mightn't have. So but we want you to engage and type in your questions. So over to you, Damian and Sara, and good luck.
Hey, thanks, Fergus.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, can everyone hear us okay?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
Okay, so as Fergus already said, the title of today's workshop or webinar is Working with ESOL Students with Broken or No Education Prior to Accessing Education in Ireland, which is a bit of a mouthful. So my name's Damian, and obviously this is Sara. So both of us work for the Youth and Education Service for Refugees and Migrants, which is part of City of Dublin Education and Training Board. And as it says in the name of the service, it's an education and youth service for young people from refugee and migrant backgrounds. We've 2 educational programs in addition to our youth service and school support program as well, study buddy program. So Sara coordinates the migrant access program.
Yeah, I coordinate the program for 13 to 18-year-olds. So about 50% of the students at any one time have never been to school ever. So, it's some will go to school, some will go to Youth Reach, and some will go on to Damian's program. So the profile really is exactly what this workshop is about.
Yeah, and so the Step Up program is, continuation and extension of the migrant access program, but the only difference is none of our young people will be going into mainstream education. Most will be taking alternative routes. I suppose a common, a typical student, maybe someone from Afghanistan who's 20 years of age, arrives into the country, they've no literacy in L1 and obviously no literacy in L2. So we're starting from scratch, starting from learning to write their name and going forward from there. Okay. So I suppose the first question to ask is, why is there a need for this workshop? So firstly, there's been a significant change in learner profile in the amount of time that ESOL has been taught in Ireland. Initially in the 90s, we would have had people coming in mostly from Eastern European backgrounds who had strong literacy, strong educational backgrounds, but they were language learners and learning language to live in Ireland, to live in this country. But with the change in learner profile, we've seen a greater need for literacy and ESOL classes. But unfortunately, most tutors are coming from either a TEFL background or a literacy background. And the challenge really is combining the two and the teachers being able to meet this challenge. One of the main concerns we have, I suppose, is the insufficient resources, and also there's a lack of teacher training. And, all of these things combined, we feel for, ESOL teachers these days, ESOL literacy teachers these days, there's a huge number of challenges are arising. So I was just wondering if you guys have any ideas, any proposals of the challenges that are arising in your classrooms.
So feel free to unmute and just say it to Damian and Sara, or to type in the chat box.
If you want to unmute or
the chat box, or are we going?
Or will we just continue?
Yeah, you might as well continue.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to type in the answer to that question, I can read it out in a slide or two.
No worries. Cheers, Fergus.
We'll go through the various challenges anyway. So there are challenges for both tutors and for students, obviously. So Damian kind of mentioned resources already. So when someone has never been to school before, it's like, how are you supposed to just, you know, plonk something from a book in front of them? It's really difficult to know which resources are valuable and which ones are going to be useful in a classroom. There are mixed levels, mixed pacing and continuous enrollment. So the demand is so high for classes at the moment that you often have continuous enrollment, and then you might have someone who's can read and write and has been to school in the same classroom as people who haven't. So that's always a challenge. As we said as well, lack of training and supports. So I don't know what each person's background is, but there are a lot of people at the moment, teachers who are either coming from a TEFL background and have never taught anyone before who has haven't been to school or hasn't taught literacy before. So, you know, certain trainings and supports might not be in place. So might be, and that's brilliant. And then it's the opposite way around as well. So I started off in Dublin Adult Learning Centre teaching Irish adults reading and writing, and then I went into TEFL, and I, you know, had to kind of get training in that way, and then moved into ESOL. So there, you know, some people are moving in from the opposite direction, so that's a challenge as well. Working with trauma. So obviously, with a lot of migrants and refugees, just even getting here in general is traumatic, but we don't know what kind of backgrounds people are coming from. And not to get into psychology too much because we're not psychologists, but the brain has to be in a certain state in order to learn it all. So, you know, we're facing these challenges daily as well. We've board work here. It's sometimes if someone hasn't been to school before, it's, you know, you forget about things like board work. Just to be very, very clear, the demands of QQI, and the need to be flexible, and then just feeling overwhelmed by all of these things in general. So they're just some of the challenges that we came up with. Again, if you have any questions about those, or you want to add anything to that, please add to the chat. Or
Sarah, Christy has just said that L2 literacy develops at a markedly slower rate with limited L1 literacy.
Yes. So that's really good point. And like you like language learners will learn at like a much higher rate, and if you don't have literacy in your L1, then like it's impossible to be literate in L2. Does anybody else have any questions on that?
Yeah, if I could just chip in there.
Yeah.
Just on the step up program. So we start with absolute beginners, A0 and 0 literacy as well, or extremely low level literacy. And we'll get up to a level 3 ESOL QQI in a 2-year period. But that's with them attending school 5 days a week. So maybe 15 hours a week, incorporating all different learning tactics. And it takes approximately 2 years for the student in L2 to get to a level 3 QQI, being able to successfully complete the modules. So most definitely it does take longer than in L1. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, Damian, there's another point from Christy. It's also a struggle for students who've no classroom familiarity. If, for example, taking turns, orienting books, holding a pencil, it can be difficult.
Yeah. Christy's bang on there. So if we look at students, you know, the challenges faced by the students, the first one is learning to learn. So yeah, from learning to even sit in the chair for a couple of hours, learning to, you know, exactly the acceptable procedures and behaviors in a classroom, you know, learning how to use a folder, everything like this, all of the skills that we've learned from, you know, a very young age, and all of us do to different levels. This is the same for our learners who are coming in. They're having to learn all of these things, you know. So yeah, Christy's bang on there. So then also for the students, again, it's another challenge can be the mixed levels, pacing, and continuous enrollment. The students can become very used to the class as it is. Then maybe people are transferred, new students come in, and with this, there's a change in dynamic, and this can be quite frustrating and intimidating sometimes for the learners. As we mentioned, there's trauma. Trauma obviously in their home country, trauma on their way over here, but also trauma that they're experiencing whilst living in Ireland, because most of our learners are in direct provision. They're seeking international protection. So they have the worries of that, the worries of being transferred, and so on and so on. You know, it's continuous, unfortunately. And that's obviously the situation in Ireland. Also, maybe the learners are living in emergency accommodation if they've come on family reunification and so on. Also, we have understanding a different script. Most of our learners are going to come from countries with an extremely different script, or they obviously may have no literacy in that script as well. And then finally, that just all leads to a sense of being overwhelmed again for the student. And as we said, the tutors can also feel overwhelmed. Are we okay to move on to the next one, Fergus? Or, yep, fine. Okay, then. So we have just a wee bit of academic research here. It's the only bit we're going to have for today, so don't worry. So, you know, so ESOL needs to become more attuned to the complex needs and learning preferences of adult refugee students. So as we were saying, in the 90s and so on, you know, ESOL was not tailored for people from adults from a refugee background. Sheridan highlights a lack of resources in an Irish context. And it's also noted that ESOL classes in Ireland fail to cater fully for low literacy and signals the need for greater flexibility in relation to pre-literacy students. And this is really the focus of this workshop today, this webinar. And then Little correctly states that students cannot be functional in a language without literacy, and that materials need to be developed with this in mind. And I think all of that kind of backs up the reasons why we're having this webinar today. Okay. So if we look here, this is from Solace, I think 2021, December 2021, and it's the level of previous education of refugees and people seeking international protection in FET. So as we can see, the vast majority, the majority of students are coming from primary, previously attained primary or below. And from our experience, even in the last 3 years, there's been a greater increase in the number of students presenting who've had extremely limited or in fact no education, never mind broken education. Okay, so here we go.
Okay, so we're going to have a look at resources and how to choose appropriate resources for students with no or limited educational experience. So I'm going to put it out to the room if anybody has anything they'd like to share about how they choose appropriate materials or what resources they use in general at the moment.
So you can, as usual, type into the chat box, or if you want to unmute and just explain a resource. Fair enough.
I continue?
Yeah, you might as well. If someone
Yeah.
puts in something, Sarah, I can
Okay.
interrupt you after the next slide.
Okay, so materials can be, as a teacher, the amount of resources out there is overwhelming in itself. So we have chosen a few different materials from different sources. Some we've taken from like literacy websites. They're literacy based. Some from NALA, some from British Council. We'll have a look through them anyway. But so basically, we're going to keep each slide up for a few minutes, and it's looking at resources, a particular resource, and then we're going to come back and talk about the pros and cons of the materials. So please try and engage as much as possible. If you have any ideas, just throw it into the chat box if you don't want to talk. I hate talking as well, so on webinars. But yeah, so we're just have a general discussion about it and then look at the pros and the cons. And why they're suitable or not suitable for the learner that we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So, sorry, bear with us. So the first one we're going to look at is a British Council material. Apologies. Okay.
Just Sarah, while Damian's pulling that up there,
Yeah.
there was a message from Albie saying, "I'm from Australia. We use contextualized materials."
Okay.
Do you want to elaborate on that, Albie?
Does Albie want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. And then Christy says this resource was recently developed in the US for Afghan refugee learners. This could be interesting for a lot of people here. Thanks, Christy. This is from the United States.
That's great, and because we there's so many great resources in, there's some, Scotland has some brilliant ones, and then ones in the United States as well, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, just about adapting resources from different countries, even if they are brilliant, but it's not really reflective of the learners' lives in Ireland, so it's just how to manipulate texts to make it more personal for the learner that we're dealing with as well, is, it really, really helps. We'll talk about that a little bit later.
So Sara Albie got back to us and just elaborated a little bit, and she said what she means is helping the refugees to settle down in the local area by
Okay,
contextualized materials. Yeah.
okay, lovely.
Well, that's ultimately what we're striving for, is for the students to integrate through language and the skills needed. And, obviously anything that can give them a greater sense of belonging is obviously of benefit. So if we look here, we have one from the British Council. British Council have a lot of good materials, in my opinion, and some less good materials. So we're just going to kind of scroll through the material, and we'd like people to consider what are the pros and cons of using this material for learners who've had extremely limited or very low level literacy, okay? And our ESOL beginners or ESOL students as well. Okay. And if anyone wants to shout anything out, feel free.
Yeah.
Just go back up again.
So Damian, first bit of feedback from Michelle is too many words on the page. Then Christy says could be tough with low literacy levels.
Yeah.
Looks good, but it's pretty text heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant feedback, to be fair. Is should be hosting this webinar, not us.
Fidel saying difficult words.
Yeah. So I think Sarah's going to look at the positives, and then I'll be the one who moans about the negatives.
Okay, so the positives that we've seen are, the images are clear. They're really nice images. So that's the first page there. Everything is clear on that. The first page, again, just to go back up, it's not, I know we said this, it's word heavy, and that feedback is correct, but the first page isn't overloaded with text. It could do without a few of the instructions, but it's not overloaded in general. It's appropriate for the level. We're assuming that the students have they've learned whatever amount up to this point and they're at present simple now, but we're still not saying it's present simple. And yeah, that's the positives really, but we're here to talk about the negatives, so let's go.
Okay, well, so firstly, one of the main concerns here would be is the font. If we look, we have this type of A. What's the correct name for that?
So it's a double story A. Is really confusing if you've just learned the alphabet. If you're learning to read and write. So a single story A is. We have an example?
We'll show later.
We'll show you an example. So this can be really confusing. If a student is then going to copy it, you'll find that they'll try and copy this, and it's just really confusing. So that's the first one, is the font that they've used. A font that might be anybody use any fonts that are better than this in the classroom?
Well, we typically use Comic Sans because it has a nice A. There are a couple of nice fonts out there. I think not every font is perfect, but Comic Sans works well for us for what we're doing. Also, so in addition to the type of font and the size, there's also unnecessary text on the pages, which for someone who's only you know, accessing education for the first time. They're going to be confused by this. So again, the more limited amount of text on the page, the better. There are unnecessary instructions. For example, match the vocabulary with the correct definition and write A to J next to the numbers 1 to 10. For a learner, this could be very difficult.
If you've only just learned numbers for the first time and then it's being confused with letters and you have to match this up, it's just totally unnecessary. So you'd eliminate both columns, so both numbers and both letters, and then just have it as a matching. So really, really simple stuff.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything they'd like to add to that?
So Sarah, two people read the font put down Century Gothic.
Okay, yeah.
And Stephen said, I find that many of these materials presuppose a level of agency that our learners don't possess.
Yeah.
They're not reflective of the circumstances of people living in heavily congregated settings.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think there was one more, just the gap fill. Generally, ideally, we might put just a small space for each letter, so it's just less confusing. And then maybe this isn't enough space as well. So that's just one more change maybe that we'd make. And then the last thing as well, this is nice to have a discussion, but you might put that at the start as well as the end. So that's that one. Does anyone have any other suggestions that they'd make?
And there's one or two things coming in from
Yeah.
Christy. It also lacks background building at the beginning, giving the learners chances to use their oral proficiency before jumping into written work.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
then, but that's something that the instructor could do verbally at the beginning.
Yeah, I agree with Christy there. I think, you know, with all TEFL materials, they're designed for a different type of learner. And so even if we're using good materials, how we use them in the classroom is going to differ than in an ESOL classroom, an ESOL literacy classroom and the TEFL classroom, you know. So, but as Christy said, that's down to the individual teacher or tutor, you know, how they use their materials. I think we have to, so we're going to move on to the second one, if that's okay. I think we just have to quickly stop sharing. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but apologies for this. It's a little bit clumsy, but fortunately we don't have to do this all the time anymore. Okay, so can you see this one, guys? Is that good, Fergus?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is ESOL Literacies, which is ESOL Literacies National 2, so which are Scottish materials. In general, their materials are very good, but obviously, for example, you know, their currency is pounds, not euro, and so on. There are things that will always have to be adapted there. But so Sarah, if you could just scroll through.
Yeah, we'll scroll through, and then if you have any ideas about what you change or what you think is good, pros and cons again, and for, you know, for literacy friendly materials really is what we're looking at. So I'll give you a few minutes to have a look. Oops, sorry. Oops, where was it? Did you find that? Sorry.
Sorry, no worries. Apologies, guys. Okay, here we go.
There you
Right,
go.
wouldn't be teaching online if everything went properly. Okay, so here we go. Just slide through it.
Okay. Christy suggested maybe a better font.
Yeah. Good.
Simpler pages to maybe less busy.
I'll just go down as far as here.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Pros and cons?
There's a pro from Christy using lines instead of having the students write letters and numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah. So
So the pros then we'll go through. So they're learner-centered materials. They have space for their name and date, which is always really nice as well, and it's clear. So students, like one of the things they will be able to do well, hopefully, if they've been in your class for a while, is write their name. So that gives a kind of confidence as well. So it's always nice to have that really clear. The font is good. It's clear, and you don't have that kind of double story A and G. And the size is good as well. It's very clear. The tasks are level appropriate as well, and it's quite obvious what it is that the students required to do. You know, if the British Council one we saw before, when you had the letters and the numbers matching, it was really confusing, whereas this isn't so bad. And it's really learner friendly. But there were a few things that we saw that weren't great, and Damian's going to go through those.
yeah, so firstly, I think, the choice of images, they don't really convey the action extremely well. So if we look at here, for example, the woman goes shopping, yeah, we can figure out she's going shopping. She has a shopping bag behind her shoulder, but it's not obvious what she's doing. Watch TV again, it's not very clear. And then even listen to music looks more to me like use my phone, for example. So again, just to be mindful of the using images that convey the action well. Also, if we look here for go to college / go to school, this is confusing for the learner. So it should either be go to college or go to school. I think this, you consider the learner in this as well. If it's, for example, a relatively old Somali man who more than likely is not going to be going to college, just have go to school, keep things more reflective of their lives, and then and keep the slash out of it. And then also just here, whilst it's kind of clear, it's also unclear. If we look at the affirmative negative example, maybe the students think that they write the positive on the left-hand side of the line and the negative on the right-hand side of the line. So again, maybe if this was just done in a more clear fashion, yeah, it's easier for the learner. Has anyone else got anything, comments on that?
Edel said using the apostrophe is difficult.
Yeah, I think where do we have the apostrophe here? Yeah, well, using apostrophe can be difficult, I think as well, when we're working with learners at this level, it's important to highlight what they can do rather than what they're struggling to do. So, I have a group at the moment where maybe 6 of the guys in the class can't really independently write their name. So when they're copying, working on their letter formation and so on, it's signaling the improvements rather than highlighting what they're struggling with until they get to a level where they're confident, and then you can work on that, So, but in
Damian,
yeah.
Damian and Sara, Christy's just asking, what countries of origin are your students mostly from?
At the moment, Afghanistan, Somalia. I have some Romanian young people as well. Palestine, and Damian.
For myself, it's just mostly Somali and Afghans. Yeah, that 95% of the school has been for a number of years. Yeah, and typically, so if we're thinking of a young person coming from Afghanistan who's maybe 20 years of age, it's over 20 years now since the Taliban, initially, everything with the States and all. So unless they're coming from Kabul, they've had extremely limited opportunities for education. So this is the type of student that's presenting mostly in our program. I suppose at the moment we have about 70% of our students are low-level literacy students, of which about 50% on the program I look after have not attended school prior to coming to us, So, but it's mostly Afghans and Somalis. Typically, the Somalis will have a slightly higher level of literacy, but again, still very low literacy from the ones who are presenting to us,
Thank you for sharing. I'm just, as someone from a different country, I was curious to see what background your students had. So that's pretty in line with what we're seeing actually here too.
Yeah. And where are you based, Christy?
I'm in Ohio in the
You
US.
are in Ohio.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have large numbers of Somalis. Actually, Ohio has the second largest Somali population in the country, second to the Twin Cities in Minnesota. So we actually have some pretty well developed resources for Somali speakers, because their language was only codified in the 70s. So it's pretty tough for a lot of them that don't have that formal education on top of that.
Yeah, most definitely. That's the thing, and the challenge. It's a global challenge. We're all obviously impacted by migration. So for the positives and the negatives, or the challenges that go along with it. Shall we move on?
Christy.
Cheers, Christy. We'll move on to the next one. Just bear with me again for one moment.
So just when Damian's looking for that, if you check back earlier in the chat box, Christy has put up some resources which were recently developed in the US for Afghan refugee learners. Could be interesting for some of you.
Yeah, most definitely.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. Okay. Here's one I'm sure many of you know. Okay, so we've chosen an English, just a bit out of English file. This could have been any TEFL book, to be fair, but English file is the one that's most commonly used in language schools. So we just thought we would use this as an example. Okay, so again, we'll just scroll through the material quickly. Or we hopefully will.
Yeah, it wouldn't let me do
There
that
we go.
last time.
Okay, has anyone got any comments on these?
Yeah, so there's a few comments coming through from Michelle. A lot of information on the page, similar from Christy, busy pages. So that's the general gist.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of the positives on this. I'm going to go to the cons of working with materials like this. There's no point dressing it up, So firstly, the order of exercises isn't even logical. Never mind looking at the text and the page being busy and so on, you've got a questionnaire before you learn the vocabulary, and it's just extremely messy, It doesn't cater for our type of learner. With a young Spanish kid coming over learning in Dublin, it works very well, So it's just for this cohort, for our target group, the materials aren't great. If we look here on pronunciation, so for you, there should be no phonetics or phonemics on any page that we're working with, We're teaching the student a new language. They're encountering it often for the first time. And then when you throw in phonetics, phonemics, and so on, you're throwing in another language as well. You're just overly complicating things, something that even many of us probably would struggle with. Also, the pronunciation that's being introduced there, it actually isn't reflected fully in the unit. We're not going to examine it too much, but the sound being taught, it's not really that relevant to what's going on there. I don't know if we didn't throw in the grammar pages, but many of you will know the grammar pages from TEFL books. Again, they're extremely complicated and confusing, and it's not the way to teach grammar.
Yeah. In fact, I usually wouldn't even name the grammar names at this point. You might talk about actions and these things, but bombarding with language like verbs and nouns, even things that we think is quite simple, is still overwhelming. There's a lot to learn.
Yeah. Even to be honest, in the Step Up program, the lowest level, we're working on literacy, and it's when they progress to the next class that we even start teaching grammatical threads more so. It's giving them the reading and writing skills to then go on and learn the language. Also, as with all of the TEFL books, the materials, the lessons could be more learner centered. what the lives they reflect in these books don't reflect on our learners' lives. That's not to say everything should be about living in direct provision or emergency accommodation or coming from war-torn countries, but you know, there needs to be similarities as well as differences, you know. And again, just looking at images, which, you know, are very important when we get on, especially to creating your own materials. You know, not all of the images convey the action particularly well. You know, if we look at the go to work one there, number 4, you know, that could be on travel by bus, could be travel by tube, could be various things, you know. So again, just to be mindful of choice of images when you're trying to teach a new piece of language.
Anything to share or add to that, or any questions about that one?
No, and I suppose one of the reasons, sorry, as well, that we've chosen English file is that, you know, I see it a lot in not in our programs, but in certain places, English file is being used for students coming in with A0 and very low level literacy.
Yeah,
and I've even seen it on internal verification on some of the QQI folders being put forward as well. So it's, you know, the idea is to help the students, to give the students a chance to do well, you know, and that's what we're looking to do.
And if you have a class that's mixed levels, you know, nobody doesn't benefit from this, you know, whereas literacy students, it's really difficult. So if, you know, if you have some people in the class and it's mixed levels, everybody will benefit from adapting materials, so that it's not really difficult for some people.
Yeah.
There's some feedback here. Sara Albie from Australia saying there's great resources for ACSF level 1 learners. Does everyone know what ACSF is? Maybe. And then Albie says we have initial preliminary certificate 1, 2, and 3 levels. That's in Australia. Maybe.
Okay. So
maybe give us a link to that if you could, please, Albie.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That'd be great. I think in Ireland at the moment, up in Louth and Meath, ETB, they've started to introduce ESOL level 1 and level 2s. But typically what we're using is just reading and writing level 2s, and so we're actually on a step-up program as well, looking at introducing level 1s, which we'd expect the young people to handle fairly well, but it's just in order for them to learn to do their folders and so on for progressing going forward. But yeah, certainly anything that can be shared. And the last one we're just going to look at here is from the big picture, which is a NALA publication. So if you just bear with me again. Okay, can everyone see that one?
Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Okay,
Okay,
sorry,
so-
I've gone down to I've gone to the end of it. All right.
So same as before, we'll try and fly through this one, the pros and the cons.
If you want to type in pros and cons there in the chat function.
Okay. So there's a lot there. So even just a couple of ideas. Pros and cons.
So Christy's saying pages are less cluttered, uses culturally relevant images and characters. By the way, just what Albie was referring to was the Australian Core Skills Framework.
Okay. Okay, well, I go through then the Anybody else have any other suggestions before I go through them? All right, so yeah, the pros would be it reflects the real life for our learner profile. Not for everybody, obviously, but it's a little bit more realistic for people than, you know, the girl in British or English file with her avocado toast. The images are nice. They're clear. The pages again, yeah, they're generally clear and simple, and there's a cohesive flow to the exercises that makes sense. You know, so it's, you know, the picture, what does she do every day? And there's a speaking part. You know, the last time, a couple of things we looked at before with this discussion was at the end. This is at the start. And then some writing kind of easing into before you get to a bigger writing exercise. There's no mention of grammar on the page, or, you know, none of this text heavy kind of instruction. It's all really clear. My day reading, read the story and find out information. It's really nice. So there are the pros and
Yep.
cons.
Yeah, I kind of not too keen on picking this one apart, but
No.
unfortunately the font isn't the May West. It's not the best, you know. We have the, again, double story A. You know, so that again, if the student's been introduced to that for the first time, that can be an issue. While Sarah said that the instructions are quite clear, there's one or two points where it's slightly more confusing. I can't find them off straight away, but where they could be. If we look here, work with a partner, read my day reading worksheet, and write the answers to the questions. Just have read and answer the questions. Keep it nice and simple, you know. But that's picking holes in something now. This is a very nice material. Perhaps numbering the pictures as well, just to help. And I suppose when we're looking at, you know, obviously a part of literacy when they're working on their writing, their handwriting skills, is learning to use the line, write on the line, and use the line as a guide. And so if we look here at number 1, what does she have for breakfast? She, and then it's ... instead of having a line, you know. It's just keep things as the students are used to, you know, as we're all used to be fair.
I'd mentioned about this one as well. This kind of, there are 2 lines. This one doesn't go to the very end. I don't know if anyone's noticed before teaching, if, you know, if the size of your whiteboard is smaller, allows you to write less than a student's page would. If you've never been to school before, you don't realize maybe that you can continue to the end and it doesn't have to stop when the teacher stops. So this is really confusing as well, taking these things in mind, into consideration.
Yep.
Anyone have anything to add there? Then we'll continue then, because I'm looking at the time. So that's basically, you know, resources. So what's wrong with them? What's right with them? And there's lots of things that are right with them, but then what's wrong with them? Why do they not work? So basically, if you find a nice resource like this, you don't have to, you know, there's no point reinventing the wheel all the time, but, you know, adapting materials is really important. So we're going to have a quick look at adapting some materials before we go on to creating your own.
So, apologies. So just to say, all of the materials that we've chosen have come either from a NALA source bank or an ETBI, Education and Training Board Ireland source bank, you know.
And specifically literacy based.
So we have chosen all of these materials for that reason, you know. So they're being recommended to the teacher. So the first one we're going to look at is this.
Okay, so this is from a literacy website. We're just going to have a quick look at it and just again pop into the chat box if there's anything that you'd change about it. So this is about adapting materials. What would you change? Do you think anything is good? Quick look. Okay, so I'll just talk through it there for a minute. So in general, it's a nice idea. You know, you have the vocabulary here, you have the image here, and then write a sentence about it. That's nice. There's enough space, there's an image, and you know, that's clear. There's a night that, you know, the name and the date up the top is lovely. However, there's not enough space. If you're just learning to write, then there's not enough space at all to do that. Again, the font, you might change it.
So if we
Yeah.
just, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If are there a few things and suggestions in the chat box what other people might change as well?
Yeah, so Christy
Yeah.
said the pictures aren't the best,
Mhm.
and Paula says the yo-yos are outdated, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Fidget spinners are even
the
gone.
pictures aren't there. They're clip art from, I don't know, 1990 or something. Okay, they're great suggestions. So we're just going to show you then how we've adapted it. Okay. So there's lots more space for the name. The instructions are clearer. I can't remember off the top of my head what it said initially, but it was a lot more than circle the word that matches the picture. With that, I've just given an example of how to circle. What does that mean? How do you do that? So it's just a little example here. On the first page, there were 28 words, all like 28 individual words. So there are now 12 and they're repeated. You know, that amount of vocabulary initially is extremely overwhelming. I've also taken out, you know, words that are just a little bit more difficult to read, like yacht was there. I've kept in yo-yo, even though they're not, because it's easy to pronounce, and it's you know, it's easy to say, and it's helpful for learning to read. There are also some words in here that are like yellow, you, yes. So they're sight words. So include them as much as you can into materials if you're making them or adapting them. You know, if you can use that, then do. We've changed the pictures because the other ones were, I don't know where they got them from. And I've included a line as well. There was no line for the student to write on. So that, you know, you might find that it's like some students they're still getting used to writing from starting here and ending here. And we've been teaching the whole time, you know, writing on the line is really important. So we've included that there as well.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in.
Yep.
So also as well, you know, the previous the one that came off English for Life, I think it was, or English for Everyone. It was the Y sound, but you know, Y has 3 sounds.
Yeah.
So what we've done here is this material has been adapted to do Y as the first letter sound, you know. So instead before it had, yeah, the 3 sounds incorporated.
Yes.
The vocabulary is more appropriate. And no offense, Christy, no offense meant here, but it was American English as well. And when we're working with students, obviously in Ireland, we're using our Irish English, Hibernian English, and so the spelling of yogurt, for example, is different. You know, if we're teaching students to spell favorite with FAVOURITE, and then they're meeting a different spelling, that's only confusing for the student, you know. Yeah, it's not the end of the world, but it's also something that we'd be mindful of.
Something to be mindful of. Yeah, exactly.
Christy's okay with all that.
Thank you, Christy. No offense,
Okay.
mate.
Absolutely. All there are tons of different versions of English for sure.
Same with Australian English as well now.
Okay, we'll fly along because we've only got 10 minutes, so
Yeah.
conscious of the time. Sorry about that. So the next is adapted material. So this the initial text, the original text is actually from a really good Irish website, ESOL Materials Ireland. They're very good friends of ours, so this is a plug for them as well. But the materials are gorgeous to begin with. They're really, really nice materials. However, they're still not 100% for, so these are ones that I adapted from one of my classes. So it's teenagers from Afghanistan and Somalia. At the time, mostly it was girls, and they're Somali girls. So I've changed it anyway, adapted it. So just have a quick look at the original one. You know, as you can see that everything's really clear. The font is really nice. They're nice images. If anybody has anything else to add, just pop it in the text box, the chat box. So it's this guy from Spain, and he's 16, and he's talking about when he goes to school and his favorite subjects, and reading a book when he goes home, and putting on his pajamas and doing his homework. All right. And then there's a lovely exercise, lovely gap filled with all the things that we were talking about. But it still needs to be adapted.
We'll change again.
Okay, so we've just made it more learner-centered for Amina, who's 16 and she's born in Somalia. All right, so instead of, you know, his face, we put up a Somali flag, and then, you know, so it's creating a sense of agency and familiarity, and with that, like, safety, and, you know, when we're thinking about trauma and having all those things in mind, the power of having the materials like this in the classroom, you know, really engages and you know, gives a sense of security just in changing something so simple and so small. So a lot of the content is the same, you know, which we changed her school day, and we've changed the photographs a little bit, the images a little bit, just to reflect what's realistic in Amina's life. So then maybe she doesn't, you know, she doesn't go home. Maybe she shares a room with 3 other people and doesn't have a desk to do her homework. So we've taken that out just in case. And we haven't mentioned family just in case that's triggering for her. And she watches YouTube instead of reading a book, because that's what she does. So it's just small changes that create, you know, a really far more learner-centered class. Any questions on that? Or any comments?
Okay.
Okay, we'll continue.
Okay. And I suppose the whole idea of that is to increase engagement and a sense of agency and belonging for the students as well as helping them learn, develop their language and literacy skills. So obviously that's adapted materials. And as we said, you know, even the best materials, so Angus and Patter at ESOL Materials Ireland, they do superb work, but things can be adapted just for the people sitting in front of you. We're going to quickly look at now creating literacy-friendly learner-centered ESOL materials, so doing it from scratch for yourself. There's an awful lot to be said for this, but obviously it's time-consuming as well. We're all busy as well, so I'm just going to show you some possibilities of things that we can do.
We know that this is kind of like, you know, resource heavy, looking at the screen, so we'll send anything out so that you can kind of go through it yourself and have a look. So if you want to leave any addresses with Fergus that we can send on materials, if you want to kind of go through it again in your own time, because I know we're flying through it, there's a lot here.
Yep.
Okay. So if we look here again, so we've kept everything as my day, so we're staying on routine really just for the purpose of this webinar. If we look, the materials, there's a nice space for writing their name and writing the date, you know. Everything's nice and clear. The page isn't text heavy. So for example, just the instructions, match the words, and they'll match upper and lower case just to introduce the language. We didn't do the full lesson. We were just giving examples. So if we look here, then match the words with the pictures. If we look, we'd have typically on every page, we'll have 12 pieces of vocabulary or 12 lexical chunks. Then, so for example, there, have a shower, wake up, and go to school. They're all fairly clear. Then circle the correct spelling again. So everything is just reinforcing the language, repetition, repetition, repetition. I don't know, the academics say that, you know, it can vary between, I think, 12 and 16 times of being introduced to a word before you learn to use it properly. That's based on people who've had a solid educational background. So for the students that we're, you know, aiming this at today, the more repetition, the better. That's not saying doing the same exercise over and over, but just repeating, introducing it in a different way. So we have circle the correct spelling, a word snake. So again, you're just looking at the spelling. Write in the missing letters. How many vowels do these words have? How many syllables? You know, putting things into alphabetical order. But again, it's just repetition, repetition, repetition. Then a reading. Then here, when we have finished the sentences, so we have the individual spaces for the letter rather than one line, but we also have the image. So each, so again, it's just making it learner friendly, literacy friendly. Then the questions, what time do you wake up? So writing for themselves, and we help initially with the I wake up at. So maybe, you know, time, we're talking about time there as well. Write about your day, ask your partner. So everything's just building slowly, slowly, slowly. You know, there's no, you're not jumping the gun, basically, you know. I think, you know, the purpose of everything we're doing is trying to build on everything that's taught, you know. So again, repetition and just step by step by step. I think that's the way forward for all of us in this job. And if you're creating your own materials, it gives you better opportunity to do that. Also, it allows you to reflect the learner and their interests, you know, more than materials that have already been done. You know, for example, I know way too much about cricket. It's a sport that I've no interest in, but because of the young Afghans that we work with, we've done a lot of created a lot of materials on cricket. You know, I still will never fall in love with the sport, you know. So again, that's just something. There are loads and loads of different ways we can, yeah. I'm being reminded by Sara that time is running out, so please bear with me. Okay, so I think we're back to the slides now, is it? Yeah, bear with me.
And people love the word snake there. And there's a very positive comment about those resources. It'd be fantastic for someone who's moving from TEFL into ESOL, maybe you taught before in a private language school. So, yeah.
We're just going to look at this. This was the problem we had earlier, Fergus. Okay, so
it's fine. We can see the slide clearly.
Yeah,
okay.
so I know we're squishing a lot into the last few minutes. So just having looked at the materials, what do they tell us about what the learner can and can't do? What do they tell us about what the learner needs? And what other practices are beneficial outside of these materials? So just really quickly, any comments about that? You know, what do they tell us about what the learner needs? And then does anybody have any other practices outside of these materials?
And nothing so far coming
Okay.
through there, Sara.
Okay, Grant. So just want to just quickly fly through a couple more things. So like materials are great, but it's not the be all and end all at, you know, the power of just going into a classroom and having a chat as well, and then you know, eliciting language from that is brilliant. So the language experiences approach, has anybody used this before? Yeah, so this is great because it's using the student's own language and grammar to create the reading and writing materials. So basically the student will tell you a story and you'll write it down for them. So it's brilliant because it uses their own vocabulary, it gives a sense of ownership, it's instant reading material and instant resources for you, and can provide a bank of essential sight words. So, you know, 9 times out of 10, you'll get like everyday words will come into it, and then can encourage writing. So basically how to generate it, you know, you ask open-ended questions like, oh, Damian, how are you? What did you do yesterday?
I went to the park.
Okay, so I'll write down, I went to the park. I wouldn't change if Damian says I go to the park and it's about yesterday, I'll still write that. I'm not going to change the grammar or the syntax at this point because it's Damian's writing. It's Damian's story, and that's what we're going to do. If we change it into a lesson at the end afterwards, you know, the next day or the next week, we can incorporate whatever we've been doing. If we've been doing past tense and learning some of those words, then we'll change the grammar for the lesson that you've made when you're making your own materials. But at this point, you don't have to do that. So you'd write out on a bit of card what the student has told you, and then maybe cut it up, jumble it around, make a jigsaw out of it, put it back together. It creates a really gorgeous bank of materials for you and for the student as well. So that's that. If you have any questions about that in 1 minute, we'll just get through the rest of it, and then maybe, because I know we're 1 minute over time. So that's that one. Board work, just want to comment on that for a second. The power of clear and simple handwriting on a whiteboard is self-explanatory, I think, there.
Yep. Okay, then just again as well, you know, there needs to be a focus on handwriting and letter formation in all the classes. As we said initially, you know, they need to grow in confidence and feel, you know, have a good sense of well-being in the classroom. So you don't want to highlight too many mistakes, but you know, it's at the initial stage where if you can teach good handwriting practices, that will, you know, continue throughout. So, you know, consider when you're forming your letter or lessons, you know, letter families and so on. So C, A, D, and so on, incorporating those into the lessons, maybe using the language based on that in the class. As we said, sorry, we barely touched on phonics, but it's something that, you know, needs to be incorporated into every lesson. I think I'm not sure. I haven't seen the people we're talking to today, but you know, many of you probably have young children. We use something very similar. We use Jolly Phonics in the classroom, but obviously those materials are aimed at primary school going children, so we have to change the images and so on. But it's the same basic principles. I know there are other phonics programs as well, but you know, most definitely, I would say probably out of every 4 hours a day on the step up program, there's at least an hour of phonics being taught throughout overall in the classes. Be mindful of trauma, as Sara said. You know, we're not here to you know, delve into that. We're not psychologists, but you know, to be mindful that trauma manifests itself in different ways, and just to get to know the student. If you know your student, you'll know their behavior that day, and maybe there's a reason for it. So just to be mindful of that. Be aware of pacing, so don't be rushing everything at the last minute as we're doing right now. But so be aware of pacing, and that, you know, to go into the class and work at the speed that's suiting the class, not what you have in your mind yourself. So respond to the class and always be flexible in that regard. Repetition, I think I've said it a few times, but you can't say it enough. So the more repetition, the better, but just obviously in new and challenging ways as well. Sara?
Yeah, just to be flexible, you know, you could spend, you know, the whole night before your lesson creating your own absolutely gorgeous materials, and whatever's happening in front of you, if it's learner centered and, you know, they're not engaged, that has to go out the window, you know. And yeah, soft eyes, just to be mindful of what's going on in students' lives, because, you know, 9 times out of 10, if they have little or broken education before they've come to you, there's a lot of different things going on there as well, like trauma, and so just to be really mindful. I think that's it, and sorry we went over time.
Yeah, and that's it really. There are some references there and so on, but we'll send those on to you in the slides rather than boring you with them now.
Yeah.
So I suppose, have you any questions? Just to, you can feel free to
another
as well.
Yeah.
There's another bit of information from who was it? Xavier. He gave a link to the LESLA website, so it's literacy education and second language learning for adults. So you can see that in the chat there, everyone. And yeah, people are just saying thanks so much for a really fantastic presentation. Stephen saying I feel much more confident in my capacities to support this group of learners. It's always valuable to hear the experience of other practitioners. Your presentation was excellent. Go Sara and Damian. That's excellent. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks
Stephen.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks
everyone.
Stephen. Thanks everybody.
And yeah, people are just saying this was wonderful. Thanks so much. Very informative. So yeah, I just echo that. Thanks so
Very good.
much, Damian and Sara. Really
Thanks for having us.
informative, practical, and just realistic, and good presentation style as well. So thanks, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks
and
everybody.
I'll send on Damian and Sara's presentation, and if anyone wants to send a website or resource to me, I think it was somebody else put up something for teaching Somalis. If they want to send that on, I can send it around to everyone who's registered. So if you want to send me any link that you like today, I'll send it on to everyone who's registered tomorrow, you know.
Yeah.
So thanks again. All the best.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.